All right, guys, I think we're getting ready to start today's live stream. Again, this is going to be on a Monday, which is very different than our usual Tuesday evening live stream. Normally, I would do these on Tuesdays. So sorry to surprise those of you who might have that built into your schedule. But for those of you who did log on right away, this is today's Ask Me Anything, which is Monday's edition. The reason why I did reschedule it to Monday is just because I had a presentation tomorrow, which is Tuesday, out in Benton County, and it was just a conflict with the event. I'm actually going to also be probably doing the live stream next week on Monday as well for similar reasons. There was a fundraiser that I had mentioned that I was going to go to for Sharon Hannock up in Redmond on the 9th, and I was going to speak there, which would be this Wednesday normally, but that got just changed, and it's actually been shifted into the following Tuesday, and which is on the 15th, and I had told her that I would be there, so I'm just going to shift and do that that day. So for those of you who are basically interested in schedule, which I know I've promised to give to people in the past. That's just, those are a few places where I'm going to be at. In addition, now the Benton County Farm Bureau is kind of a limited audience because it's going to be the Farm Bureau folk out there in Benton County at the Liberty Barn, and I think they limit it generally to Farm Bureau members in that county. However, if you live in Spokane, I know I'm going to be out there at the GOP fundraiser. I know I'm speaking there on October 12th, that's Saturday. I don't have right in front of me, I don't remember exactly the time of it starting, but I will be out there then. So if you can look it up on their website and you want to come by and say hi, please do so. I will be out there around that time. Also, the following Saturday, the 19th, I'll be an MC at the Kittitas County Republican event, which I think is going to be held at Central Washington University that evening as well. So just a couple of events kind of coming up. Also, I know I'm doing something November 4th. I'm speaking at a big event down in Clark County. Haven't had a chance to post anything about that yet or to talk too much about it, but I'm just trying to let people know just schedule-wise, those are some places that I'll be at. Just coming up in the near future. There's always a lot of other things that I'm doing that don't necessarily show up on a calendar, but those are some of the more public events that I will be out there at. And usually I'm speaking, or sometimes in the Kittitas County, Ellensburg case, I'll be actually doing some live stream calls. This is an Ask Me Anything live stream, again, as I mentioned, and as we usually do on our live stream events. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the comment section that you probably see. I don't know if it's like facing this way from your perspective or the other way, but wherever you see that on your screen, feel free to put any questions. To make it a little bit easier for me to spot your question, if you can, hit the @WeTheGoverned logo. And what that does is it just kind of pops out, and it makes it a little bit easier for me to see the question here. I'm going to mention this just offhand here. And see if I can get this. I'll show you what one of these looks like. And generally, while I'm trying to answer your questions, do my best to try to answer them, I'm going to be looking at them like this, and they'll be on the screen live when I'm attempting to answer your questions. No guarantees that I actually answer it, but I'll be doing my best. For those of you who were at the Port Townsend Oktoberfest event Saturday around noonish and stuck around after some of the candidates spoke and listened to my presentation out there. Thank you for doing that. I really enjoyed interacting with a bunch of people, some people I've never met before and some people that I've known for a while. And it's always good to be out in Port Townsend. I love Jefferson County as much as they tend to vote poorly certainly when they vote for statewide office holders. But I always feel like things are changing, and at some point in time, most places do come around and eventually recognize that electing the worst people in office is not necessarily a choice that you always have to make. But for those people who are waving the flag of good government out there trying to do their best, that was a really good event. I'll tell you something that really stuck out while I was there. I saw the three candidates that are running for the 24th legislative district, position 1 and 2 for the legislature and the Senate seat out there. And what a great collection of candidates. I knew all these candidates. I knew of them. I had met some of them, of course, for over the years, and some of them I've heard and seen run for office before. But This was a real treat to really see all three of them speak, the Republican candidates speaking, and they were so much more qualified and capable than the Democrats that run it against. I mean, it was really impressive to see that the Republicans have fielded some really good candidates like that out there on the Olympic Peninsula. It seems to be one of these districts, the 24th legislative district, where it seems like there should be some change at some point in time, and that gap is starting to close a little bit out there. But boy, I'd sure love to see any of those guys and gals get into office. I mean, it would just be really impressive. So it was really fun to be out there and to see anybody, just to see everybody there. Let's go to some of our questions. Again, no guarantees that I'm going to get to all of them, but I'll get to them roughly in the order that you post them if I can see them. So first question up, and this one was from Susan Murphy, and it says, why can't we get back to in-person voting on the ballot? And that's a good question. And this comes up pretty much every live stream that I've done. I think this is at least some question or a question related to this topic that comes up all the time. And I think the clarity that I want to add to this, because I feel like I do repeat myself quite often when I'm answering some of these questions, it's not that you can't get there, it's that there's no instant solution. You essentially have three legal paths that you can get to change from the existing mail-in voting and the way it exists now. To be honest, I'll put these in what I think is the most likely order in which you would get there. Number one, just looking at some of these federal cases that are happening around the country and the collapse of the U.S. postal system and the post office in general and a lot of the problems that are related to that, and the fact that mail-in voting can't exist unless you have the post office function as an effective entity, and they've been having a lot of problems that have nothing to do with voting. It just has to do with their own bureaucratic problems that are occurring there as a federal agency. And the most likely thing I think that would happen in Washington State is if you had a federal ruling that just finally said this mail-in voting or this widespread mail-in voting is just a disaster and a scam and a real big problem because we can't track what the heck's going on and there's no standardization of rules and all these other reasons that I think the federal government could come in and just say we're not going to allow that type of voting because it opens the door to fraud, it opens the door to bad actions, it makes it harder to audit, et cetera, et cetera. I could see them doing that. I could see it happening. So that's one path. And the Fed just come in and say you can't do it. The second path would be if for some reason, if some way you were able to get an initiative on the ballot that polled well enough that the majority of voters in the state, remember, the majority of voters voting by mail would be, or technically by mail, would be voting to change the way that they vote. And it's very difficult to make changes in a state election process, other than changes for the worse. It seems to be very easy to make voting worse. It's very hard to make it more, change it in a way that makes it better. You just have to have lots of scandals and lots of problems. If you've noticed Argentina recently, they went and changed their election process to what sounds like a pretty normal process now. I don't know what the heck they had before, but under this, what is it? I think Prime Minister Mailin, right? The guy that's there now. I can't believe Argentina. I'm even talking about Argentina in any context of freedom or liberty, but he's gone through this process where they've changed. They made a big change to their election process, and it sounds much more reasonable, realistic, and helpful for the people who live there. So big change that he brought about there. But it had been the old archaic system they had been in place for 80 years. When Northern Ireland, I remember they cracked down and tried to change their election process because they were concerned about so much fraud that was going on in-person voting that they were doing back in the 90s. And they made that change that basically did obviously cut out a lot of fraud. It was widely believed that they cut out about 11% of the voter rolls that were fake or fraudulent at that point in time. That took a lot of drama and decades of concern and problems before they finally made that change. The trend into less and less secure elections has been something that's happened more over time. It's a gradual process, and it's really, honestly, we've only had 4 years of genuine attention and awareness to the significance of this problem on a widespread basis. Yes, I know. I was aware back in 2011 when I was doorbelling and finding weird problems with the voter rolls, and the Dino Rossi race from 2004 in our state raised the stakes. The 2000 election in Florida at a presidential level, of all things, God help us, should have been a wake-up call to archaic and incompetent and bad election processes and sloppy systems. But it was really, all those things really became just background noise in comparison to the 2020 election and the attention that it's gotten since then, and the weird way that it's become a partisan thing too. So the fighting back and forth, I've been in the middle of it a lot, is trending in a way that I think over time in general towards a better election system over time, but glacial pace. A lot of the problems that we're concerned about haven't been addressed. Changing mail-in voting is not the only issue, and I need to emphasize this to people who think that there's a nirvana utopia coming down the pike with that one change. It isn't, but it would fix some of the issues and concerns that we have. So the third issue, of course, the easiest technically would be if you had a good governor and a majority in both legislatures that just decide to change the law and pass it that way. That'd be the simplest. But I don't see that happening right away. I do get the sense, however, that the Republicans, I think in Washington State, do have a decent chance of picking up some seats in both houses. The statewide races, I think we're still a little far out to know for sure. There's a few dark horse races, I think, that could do better than people realize. But it's all about voter turnout. And if you stay at home and sit back and throw your hands up in the air, and go into your bunker, then you're not going to achieve anything or help anybody achieve anything. But if you're actually able to go out and vote, and there's a large enough people to do, and the change that I see sweeping the other parts of the country, if it starts to impact us here, you'll probably make some differences, and that could lead to significant change over time. Andrea K. got a question here. Have you seen Let's Go Washington's campaign commercial with Pinocchio, who looks like Ferguson, yeah, and his ever-growing nose? Brandy Cruz had it on her show today, and it was hilarious. It was. I have seen it. I actually had been considering trying to do a video on that myself today, and I just wasn't set up to do that video today. I did do a recorded a video today, which I'm hoping to launch tomorrow, just about the billionaires. Just a ridiculous campaign attacking the initiatives and how absurd it is. And so I did a video on that today. I did another video on the concerns about censorship and the fact that it does look like our established political class realizes the risk that they run if they don't censor us, and that they've lost the narrative, and they're losing control of the narrative, and they're losing control of the media, and the threats that represents to the ruling class in America. So there's a separate one about that. But yeah, Andrea, that was a great commercial. I'm glad to see them out there doing that. We're in the final home stretch. There's going to be a lot of chaos, and I think that that's a great question, or a great thing to bring up, and I encourage everybody to go look at that. I'm sure they're going to have it on their website as well. I haven't looked to see that it's there, but they'll probably have it there as well, and I think it's good to have that. Obviously, the left is lying like crazy, just in a complete panic meltdown mode over the fact that you might want to reduce your taxes and not waste whatever money you send them on stupid schemes and dreams that they're trying to fund and grift with all of your tax dollars. Jack Podler, sorry, I kind of skipped over your question here. Is it now legal to home distill in Washington? Also, do you think a catastrophic October surprise is likely? Let me deal with the second. Well, first, let me deal with home distillery. I don't know. Obviously you can make beer and you can make wine at home. Does that mean you can distill hard liquor in Washington State? I don't know. I would assume that you could today, because the grip of the anti-liquor kind of lobby, the government side of it has kind of been weakened over time, especially after Costco ran that, ending the public liquor stores essentially and allowing people to sell, or businesses to sell liquor at their stores. Alcohol prohibition in Washington State is an interesting history. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's kind of fascinating if you go back and you look at it, because initiatives have been on the topic of conversation. The initiative process didn't exist in the original Washington State Constitution in 1889. In fact, that would have been probably not top of mind, and I don't know that they even discussed it during the state constitutional convention when they were originally kind of putting together Washington State's constitution. Washington State's constitution was drafted around the same time that North Dakota's, Montana, I believe. There were a number of states. That's why the state constitutions between a number of western states are all very similar, because there was a lot of talk between the states and debates as to different issues in the state constitutions. However, in the mid-1890s, the idea of the initiative process was popping up. And mostly it was frustration and anger by average citizens with the corruption and of their politicians, no surprise, and the concern that their politicians weren't willing to listen to them on issues that mattered to them. One of the things, this is kind of funny, and you have to remember this. It's all context of the time you live in. Prohibition was a huge movement in America. Long before it hit the federal scene. It was a huge movement in America. And in Washington state in particular, there were several, we've called them progressive, but at the time these were movements that the Republican Party was largely behind and was helping to facilitate in Washington state. Number one was giving women the right to vote. Number two was banning alcohol. At the time, those two were probably linked together a little bit. There were a couple other reducing the property taxes, eliminating the poll tax. There were some other things that were going on. But banning alcohol was a big, huge part of the progressive and political movements, the open and kind of agitation for political change in Washington state in the late 1890s and early 1900s was to give women the right to vote, the suffrage movement, and then also banning alcohol. And there was some relationship to them because alcoholism at the time would have been viewed as a bigger problem for men than it would have been for women. At least that's generally going to be the way it was viewed at the time. So anyway, the arguments against the initiative process by both lobbyists and politicians in Washington state for the decade or so before the initiative the initiative process was approved in Washington state's constitution. The arguments against it were that the first thing Washingtonians are going to do is they're going to ban alcohol. And of course, they were right, because the initiative process, was added to the state constitution in 1912. 1914 is the first year they ran the citizens' initiatives. And one of the very first initiatives that they qualified with signatures was the prohibition of alcohol, which was indeed prohibited in 1914. Now, Washington state also gave women the right to vote in 1910, which predated the federal women's suffrage movement by about 10 years. It's kind of interesting. So for those of you who are interested in Washington state history and why it is that alcohol is treated so strangely in our state and why it's so expensive in our state compared to others, once government gets involved in making big cash on something, especially a sin tax like that, they're not going to let it go very easily. It's only Costco's money, the millions they threw at it with the initiative process a few years ago, that kind of started to break down that monopoly on alcohol, which is interesting. But you still see some remnants of that, and home distillery was one of the things that had been made illegal for a long time. But gradually that's gone. I'm assuming that they do formally allow it now, but I don't know it for sure. Second part of your question, sorry to get so long-winded on that one, was the catastrophic October surprise is likely? I think it is. Listen, we're living in a chaotic time right now, nationally, around the world, and what I'm really seeing is much more of a panic at the political kind of elite level of politics. It's not just the billionaires in Washington state that are freaked out about the fact that you might want to reduce your tax burden, but this political leadership, or at least the people that view themselves as our leaders, they're in a total panic mode. It hits the bureaucracy, it hits the lobbyists, it hits the billionaires, it hits the big businesses, big academia, all of this. They're in a panic that the peasants are not liking the garbage that's been shoveled to them. The media is in a panic that you don't believe them anymore. And that's inevitably causing them to overreact in a lot of ways. And those are the people who have their fingers on the levers of power, and they have the ability to create crises and invent problems all over the place. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's going to happen. Why is Bill Nye the no science guy, lying about initiatives? And I'm assuming that's what you mean is initiatives, not initiates. And I didn't know that Bill Nye actively got involved in opposing these initiatives, but it wouldn't surprise me. Listen, these guys are paid off just like anything else, and 2117 would be the one that he would be most in opposition to. And I'll jump into that question next because VTRAC, you mentioned it here, but he gets grants. these guys are corrupt. Don't believe that they're just there because they actually care about science. It's a big money-making operation. Listen, if he didn't come out in opposition, to be fair, he would be basically treated like the plague. He would be he'd lose all his grants. He'd get kicked out of his operation. He'd lose his media business. He would be probably sued a whole bunch of places. I mean, it would surprise me. It takes a lot of bravery to come out and support some of these initiatives because they rock the political establishment and the corrupt grifting class that thrives on it. And so anybody that's going to come out and say, vote yes, pay less, they are going to be treated like pariahs, especially if you're already in that ecosystem of grifting operations. And, Bill Nye is right in the middle of it. So it kind of would surprise me if he didn't do that. Also, I'm assuming you're asking me if you've seen, you're saying you've seen a bunch of Ferguson ads. Yeah, these are great. In total crap, he's claiming to be a law and order guy and support police. Yeah, Ferguson is the anti-law and order guy. He loves violent crime. He's done everything he can to facilitate and support it in our state. He likes drug overdoses. He's done everything to encourage more of them in the state. Every policy he supported has historically assured that you're going to have more crime, you're going to have more drug overdoses, you're going to have more violent sex predators released into the community. Ferguson has personally and publicly and policy-wise in every way endorsed these policies. Suddenly, he does polling when he's getting ready to run for governor, and he realizes that he's perceived logically and accurately as being very weak in this area and that it could cost him his forever aspiration to become governor. And so now he suddenly pretends like he cares about public safety, which he has never, has zero evidence that he's ever cared about public safety. On his watch, Washington State's become a lot less safe. And it's, some of it's him actively making us less safe. Some of it's his unwillingness to do anything to stop crime at all. And it didn't help that during CHOP and the COVID lockdowns and all these other crises that hit our state, Ferguson was the guy abusing us, not helping us. He was the guy who looked the other way and pretended like it wasn't happening. He wasn't the guy trying to stop it. He's the guy who loves government corruption at every level and will ignore it no matter what, especially if they're potentially political donors or his office has anything to do with it. It's under his direct watch that his employees destroy records and conceal the truth from the public. As policy and as at his direction is what it looks like. And so that's what he brings to Washington State. So, but lying, it's just like he says he's a friend of farmers. I mean, nobody's done more to hurt farmers than Ferguson. Yeah, this is another thing. It's so funny. Why no Reichert ads? I don't think he has no ads. I think what you see is he doesn't have enough money for ads. I don't know if he's wasted it on the consultants and they sucked him dry, or if he just really hasn't raised enough to have that same level of competition. Ferguson's raised a lot more money than Reichert. Reichert's raised more money than any other Republican in recent times, at least going back to McKenna. But, he's still not had probably the same funding to get out the ads. And I don't know that there's been no ads, but you're also going to probably see him run those ads in different environments than where Ferguson's going to want to run them. David wants to go to the Green Bluff event. David can't afford it. I have no idea what you're talking about. Green Bluff, is that the one in Spokane? If it is, sorry that he can't afford it. I'm just speaking there, so I don't know how much it costs. You'll have to let me know. Is there any chance the initiatives will win? I've seen zero ad support. There's a good chance that they'll win. That's why you're seeing so many ads against it, because the total panic in the political kind of grifting class that these initiatives are going to take away their cash cows and prevent them from being able to squander your tax dollars on whatever stupid ideas that they come up with next. So there's a good chance that they'll win. The question is, do all four of them win? Or is it a mixed bag? I don't know. We'll have to see. That's just going to take, we just have to see. But vote yes, pay less. It's not a hard thing to remember. It's the first thing on the ballots in November. I'm hoping that it inspires more people to get out there and get involved and vote, because this is something that most regular people, I think, are going to want to support. And so I would anticipate it passing, all four of them passing, but we'll have to see. When do the ballots get sent out? Well, it depends on which county you're in. Some counties have actually already gotten their ballots sent out just recently, and some of them I think will be in another week and a half. but you should start seeing them certainly by mid-October at the latest. So be prepared, get those ballots. When you get them in, my recommendation strongly is to fill them out early and get them in early. And don't trust the post office. Please, dear God, don't trust the post office. We're seeing more and more problems with it with the post office, and I would not be trusting them. I would make sure that you get your ballots in. Let me give you a couple of examples of when I say don't trust the post office, because I think this is, it doesn't mean that every postal carrier is corrupt or some kind of that's not what I mean. What I mean is it has nothing to do with even their political motivation. I mean, the Seattle Distribution Center, yes, is infested with a bunch of leftists. And the Postal Union is also aggressively pro-left-leaning program. A lot of the people who work there really are fairly politically neutral. The problem has to do really with how the post office system has been set up. Sometimes it affects the way they postmark ballots, and part of it's been the way they treat employees and the quality of training for those employees, the fact that employees are being forced sometimes to do double shifts, and they get angry because they want to go pick up their kids after work and they don't want to get stuck into a 4-second shift. Some of the post office, apparently they're allowed to do stuff like that with people where they can force them to do work overtime even if they don't want to. And it incentivizes employees to go throw away the ballots or dump them in the garbage. They don't necessarily distinguish the ballots from the other mail. But that's one of the problems that we're running into. We're running into a problem in Eastern Washington where people who put their ballots the last day and don't get them postmarked correctly, because they're collecting them all and postmarking them at the Spokane Distribution Center. And so that's kind of a problem. There's other issues that are going on out there. That the post office is really a big part of the problem. Now, we have seen political discrimination through the Seattle Distribution Center where they've thrown away Republican mailers or made sure they didn't go out until after the ballot. A number of things like that have happened there, which is direct partisan interference, most likely, by some employees who work there. When I've gotten the Postmaster Inspector General to investigate these in the past, they've agreed that it happened. They've not ever formally identified somebody that did it because they probably just made it so that you couldn't see who just happened to conveniently stick that, shove your stuff in the garbage or hide it in the back. But it is a problem. So. Michael Case, good question. After the mystery smell happened in Southwest Washington, has the state taken any new measures on public information about it? Good question. And that was weird. It was funny because that story, and for those of you who don't know it, there was it was actually made national news that there was this weird smell advancing across mostly Clark County, I think, maybe a little bit up into Cowlitz County. And there was no apparent source for it. And they were worried that it had natural gas smell or something else. The natural gas companies that have gas lines said they couldn't find, there were no leaks. They didn't know what anybody was talking about, but it was weird. I don't know. I'm assuming they must have done some tests on it. And I haven't heard anything public about it yet at all. So we'll have to see what happens. Luck Thin. Is it possible to divide Washington into 12 electoral college districts between congressional districts and 2 populous districts? Okay, this is essentially structuring, what he's asking here is actually the idea that you could take Washington State, which is a winner-takes-all, which is electoral college kind of approach to the presidential election. So Washington State has 12 electoral college votes, 2 for the senators, 10, 1 each for the congressional districts. That's essentially how it's proportionally arranged. And what he's saying there is, could you divide it so that that you would, because you do have red and blue districts, congressional districts in Washington State, and so could you have it more proportional? And the answer is yes, it is legal to do that. Washington, or I should say Nebraska and Maine currently do it. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court. But in order to do that, there's only 2 paths to make that happen in our state. Either the legislature would decide to do it, which right now is run by Democrats, and the governor would sign off on it, who happens to be a Democrat today. Or you could have it done by an initiative. There is a way to do that by initiative. That would be very unusual because it'd be kind of an esoteric initiative that would be hard to explain to people, but essentially you'd be breaking it into like a proportional representation. So what it means is that Washington State, for example, maybe would get 3 electoral college votes would go to a Republican, or 4 of them, more likely. and 9 would go to a Democrat, and probably the two populist at large ones would go to the Democrat, potentially, at least the way Washington State votes right now. And what it would do is that it would force both political parties to campaign here. Neither political party at the presidential level campaigns in Washington State. They don't care about us. The Republicans figure it's hopeless, so they come here to fundraise, and the Democrats figure they got it in the bag, so they come here to fundraise. It's the only reason any of the presidential campaigns ever come here. To be fair to Trump, he was a little different because he had rallies like up in Skagit County and in Pierce County and all around the state. It was kind of interesting to see Trump run these presidential campaign events here because that's very unusual. Obama did some here too back in 2008, I remember. But mostly, not so much Trump because he wasn't raising funds so much at the time, but Obama definitely just treated Washington State like a piggy bank, which is what most Democrat presidential candidates do. And Republican candidates, if they come to Washington State, they'll generally be targeting, trying to raise money here. And so we'll just have to see. Luck Thin, the Secretary of State was Kim Wyman, a Republican. Why did she change it to mail-in voting? And the truth is, when Kim Wyman got into office in 2012, the state had actually changed to all mail-in voting in 2011. And it predated Kim Wyman. More significantly, the shift to mostly mail-in voting, because at that point in time, I think you only had part of Pierce County that was resisting it, where they still had polling stations. And so before she got into office, it went to all mail-in voting. Part of it was that Sam Reed was the previous Secretary of State, and he loved mail-in voting. That was like his favorite program ever in the history of the Secretary of State's office. And so he pushed it, and the Democrats loved it, right? Because they felt like they could get more results the way that they wanted, and especially after the 2004 election, where Rossi won several races, and then the mystery batch of secret ballots that was stuck in the election workers' car, and the intervention by the King County Council at the time to the elections department, which at the time wasn't an elected position in King County because it's a home rule charter, and they had taken away the position of a county auditor in that county. They were being manipulated to only count certain votes, and in the end, Gregoire gets elected by this narrowest margin. And after that, I think the Democrats and Sam Reed thought mail-in voting's great. The whole system's super. And so they pushed it for a few years, and it got it in completely by the time Kim Wyman took over. So that was how it happened. And it's unfortunate. I was there testifying in favor of a bill a couple years later. It's a number of years ago now. It was before COVID, so I don't remember what year it was. I just happened to be in the legislature, and I noticed that there was a hearing. I happened to be walking in the legislature at the time, and I saw there was a hearing about bringing back the option for counties to restore, at least at a local level, the ability for people to vote at a polling station. And they actually had a hearing on it, which is unusual, a local government hearing. And I was one of 3 people, I think, who testified there in favor of that. Maybe now today that bill would get a little bit more traction, but at the time there were very few people who were interested in supporting it. And that was pre. I want to say that was pre 2017, somewhere in that time frame. T.T. Burton, with the hurricane in North Carolina so close to the election, what can the state do to ensure people get a chance to vote? What is our state's plan for emergencies close to the election? Well, TZ, I can guarantee you Washington State is an incompetent clown show when it comes to preparing for emergencies. Look at the goofballs in charge. They have no plan of any significance. However, I would anticipate that based on recent experience in the last 4 or 5 years, they would probably try to bring the National Guard out for doing something. I mean, they already did that during the election cycle of 2020, if I remember right, where the National Guard was actually there, supposedly monitoring the system. There's some other drama related to that, probably dealing with some hacking that was going on, and they're concerned about it. I would anticipate that they would have the National Guard on standby to come in. Remember, they brought the National Guard weirdly in when they had that when they lost all that money in 2020 from the Employment Security Department in Washington State, which was obviously an inside job. And the employees who probably were involved in facilitating that were never disciplined or identified. And 600, in the end, they thought it was about $1 billion. I think it ended up being about $600 million. It just vanished, supposedly to a Nigerian fraud scheme. And it was National Guard that they brought in to help try to clean up the paperwork mess there, which is just still an odd thing for me to imagine utilizing the National Guard to do that, but they were brought in to help on that. So I'm sure that that's kind of part of their plan. Short of an earthquake, a major earthquake in Washington State, or Mount Rainier blowing up, I don't anticipate a natural disaster that would probably directly affect the election, other than maybe a power grid failure. Maybe the left finally gets their dream and the power grid goes down for a couple months. That would be a problem. So if that happened, then there's no plan for that of any significance that matters. The National Guard has emergency plans, like for an earthquake, for example. And so I believe that the National Guard in Washington State's reasonably prepared they certainly have plans to implement if you really have a catastrophic earthquake. And those are generally going to be applicable to a Lahar-associated event with a volcano blowing up. I don't know what kind of plans they really have for widespread grid failure in Washington State. And other than that, I don't know that we don't have hurricanes out here. We don't tend to have, tornadoes or any kind of event like that. So I don't know. We'll have to see. But it's good to think about it. And another good reason, just get your ballots in early. There's no reason not to do that. Let's see. Oh, by the way, Michael Hamilton, first time live. Thank you for joining us. Here we go. How do we get Washington State billionaires to directly fill the state treasury without spending millions to fight us in the initiatives? Filling in for Thunderstriker. Yeah, TZ. Actually, great question. And, this is the classic issue. I brought it up in my video today. I'll launch it tomorrow. But essentially, it's the billionaires have realized that they don't even have enough money to fund all their dreams and schemes that they would like to implement. And it's a lot of work. You got to hire people. You got to audit companies and stuff like this, and it's their own money. And government's so incompetent and disastrous and dishonest that the billionaires don't even have enough money to fund the government programs that they think would be good in Washington State. So what they've realized long ago, and Nick Hanauer openly brags about it at Civic Ventures, is that you just get the government to do your dirty work for you, which means get you and I, little people, paying for their leftist programs, or programs that are guaranteed to fail, or at least politicized so that they promote their political causes. And if you're a billionaire, it's pretty smart, because it's a lot less money just to bribe politicians and fund their campaigns and to influence those people to then in turn divert all that money into the projects like homeless grifting operations, or climate change scams, or crappy education programs, or whatever it is that they're funding in the day. And so there's you can't force the billionaires necessarily to fund the federal or the state government, and they aren't going to do it because they're actually relatively smart people, as much as they might have horrible political ideas, and they know that they'd rather put that money into a fancy new yacht or buy another basketball team, in case of Steve Ballmer, rather than actually go out and do the hard work of trying to do the right thing. So it's just become this nasty thing where they spend millions of dollars to influence government, and they have an outsized impact on government then to squander its money, yours and mine. And that's why they're so angry about the potential that you may come out and say, yeah, I'm going to vote yes, pay less, I'm going to cut these taxes, and the squandering opportunities that government has to waste our tax dollars. So we'll see what happens. Again in November, it's coming up, and that's a big deal. Let's see. Ask a question to chat. I forgot to do my research this week for questions. That TZ Burton. That's funny. You don't have to research. Just ask me the questions as you get them. Bill Nye has been in ads. Okay, thank you for clarifying. That's so classic. The left is going to try to find some celebrity that they can find to make up some kind of story. And it's so funny, and this is a follow-up to this. This is Janice Lohman here about saying that they portray him as a good guy because he teaches. Well, there's a lot of corrupt people that teach, and anyway, we'll have to see what happens. TZ Burton kind of addressed this earlier. You're asking if the state Republicans can pick up seats in Olympia or if we're headed for a Democrat supermajority. It looks to me like the Republicans will probably pick up a seat or two in both houses. I don't know exactly how many. It could be more. If it's more than 2 seats in each house, then it's a pretty big win for the Republicans and an outlier sort of impact. And people can go back, and including myself, and we'll spend a lot of time going through the data to figure out why that happened. Even with the egregious incompetence of Republican consultants and the fact that they're addicted to losing, it does look like the Republicans will probably pick up a couple seats. I don't think the Democrats will get a supermajority right now. They had a supermajority back in the early 90s, and that got thrown out in 1994 when the Republicans really had the biggest turnover in state legislative history and the congressional representation as well. And so that's been a long time now since we've had that kind of supermajority in the legislature. There we go. So, and here's the answer. I saw TZ was wondering, and it sounds like we had a name change here on one of the people who does frequently ask questions here, which I think is interesting. Do we need a ballot initiative to give a fixed lifespan to governor emergency declarations, referring to emergency declarations by Governor Inslee during COVID? Actually, it kind of depends. I mean, I think you could do an element of this by initiative, but I'm going to point out that there is a part of the state constitution that was kind of quietly and oddly changed a couple years before COVID. And I remember when it happened, there were a few people in opposition, but not many. It was like a housekeeping kind of thing that was going on. And the origin of the emergency powers and this emergency declaration kind of idea really came out during the Cold War in case of a nuclear war, and just so to give a constitutional sort of arrangement intended as a very short, limited application of the emergency powers in Washington State. And it was sort of used after when Mount St. Helens blew up in the early 1980s. I think it was 1981. And I remember that when that happened, and that you did have a genuine disaster in that area. And the idea had always been at the time, this idea that, okay, we could have an earthquake again, we could have a volcano again, we could have something that could be bad, and we may need to use government resources in a limited application where we're trying to control the situation and get people out of harm's way. That was the theory. Nobody had intended it to be used and abused the way Inslee decided to do that. And it probably does need to go back. You could go back and change it, but you probably also, I think, have to change state constitution. And at this point in time, now that's no longer like a quiet, sleepy, wonkish kind of fix. It's become very political. And so you might be able to do it with a Republican governor in there, because the Democrats would be concerned about trying to hold that Republican governor back. And so what you'd be really wise if the Republican governor comes in and declares an emergency and panics the Democrats, and then maybe you can get the Republicans and Democrats to come together and change it. That's what I would do. And that would make it go better. It's kind of funny. Alex Brown, I answered this question once earlier today, but I'll do it again. I anticipate depending on what county you're in, the ballots are probably going to come out. They could be landing already. I thought it was Pierce County that got the ballots out early. Might have been Thurston. I haven't seen them yet in Thurston, but these are some of the counties sometimes send them out early. But I would anticipate that most people see their ballots in about 7 to 10 days. So that's what I would expect. Maybe a little bit longer. Let's see. I'm going to take a break from the live stream for a while. I'm going to let everyone come on and have room to ask your questions. After last week's Thunderstriker Ask Me Anything questions, that's pretty funny. Always appreciate the questions, guys. And doesn't mean I'm always going to be any good at answering any of them, but I'll do my best. Dolph Lundgren of Rocky IV movie has a real science degree from Washington State, not Bill Nye. Go Cougs. Well, that's funny. And there's a lot of people that fake it on I mean, that's surprising, right? And once they get political, then it's become a hopeless cause. So we'll see how it goes. Let's see. Remember, the R's are like Charlie Brown and the D's are like Lucy. Yes, that's true. And the Republicans certainly function that way most of the time. I do think we're kind of in this weird political transition in a way that isn't as cleanly ideological, I think, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be consistent in its application or how people view things. But under the term of populism, a lot of ideas kind of get lost in the mush of what that means to people. But it does seem to be more of a practical shift on the Republican side of the equation to be a lot more inspiring to more people to come in and join their big tent in their kind of anti-establishment, anti-big government, kind of just anti-abuse, anti-war, all this kind of stuff that I think is coalescing around this Republican-ish sort of agenda. The Republican Party's gone through changes in the past. It was considered more interventionist back in the 1880s through the early 1900s, probably coming out directly as a result of Reconstruction in the South, and for the first time, the government being so involved in kind of the day-to-day business of local government. So then the Republicans shifted away from that later on and became closer to what you imagine they are today, post 1930s. The Democrats have been on a trajectory that's really been much more into this leftist sort of worldview. They've always been kind of favorable towards that, but there was room on the Democrat Party until the last 15 years or so for people that believed math was real and probably believed in individual freedom of some kind. Free speech, things like that. Well, now those people are being excommunicated and thrown out. So I think that's the big shift that you're seeing, and it hasn't fully coalesced, and there's still infighting in both parties. But it seems this is where it's all kind of settling out. We'll see how it goes. Jason Vandercoy, just recently in King County, an illegal migrant was pulled over for a traffic infraction. He had 13 kilos of fentanyl in his vehicle. The fentanyl was seized, but the driver released. Well, that sounds typical, especially in King County. And if you talk to some of the King County sheriff deputies, you'll understand because they no longer have an elected sheriff there. It's an appointed sheriff. And so the politicization of law enforcement has gotten pretty extreme. And so being friendly to crime and criminals is what allows and ensures that it continues to grow. And that's one of the problems that we have. Kathleen, a music lover, should we drop them in the ballot box? Given the choice, here's what I would do. I mean, this is personally, I'll try to sign my ballot and I'll drop it directly off the auditor's office. I'll avoid all the middleman, go right to source. It gets put in there, and then in theory, it's under lock and key, camera, and observers. If you put it in the ballot box or the drop box, it will get to the same place sooner and more certainly than the post office. It doesn't mean, if you mail it that it won't get there. It just means a little bit less likely, and especially if you come out towards the end, it's a problem. It's interesting because the problem, again, as I mentioned earlier in the show, the problems of the post office affect the viability of mail-in voting. And it's not, the problems of the post office aren't directly related to the problems that we're seeing in our election system. It's just that was the government entity that they wanted to rely on with this program, and now we're seeing a lot of problems. The Democrats' version of voter suppression in Washington State is to have an incompetent post office that ensures that ballots, just by design and incompetency from rural areas, just get delayed and then time-stamped the wrong date, and then they don't get accepted. You bypass all of that if you use the ballot drop box or you hand deliver it directly to the auditor's office. You got about a month to run up and drop it off, so get it filled out, get it in. Let's see, Michelle Andrews, at We the Governed. Many municipalities running short on budgets, cities and counties in Washington State, sent a bill to legislatures, retain 0.1% of 1% for taxed for public safety, fund the police. Thoughts? That's probably not a bad idea. I mean, theoretically, and this depends on which county and city you're in, there's a little bit of variation in this, but the truth is, most budget line items in the county, the largest share of them anyway, it's usually about 88%. It could be between 85 and low 90%. In most counties, again, excluding the capital budget and excluding the transportation budget, which legally gets set in different pots. But in the general fund, about 88 to 93% of the budget goes to law enforcement or public safety. Public safety is defined as public defender's office, the courts, the clerk's office, which is the Superior Court clerk in most counties, and then law enforcement itself and a jail if they have one under the county control. So you can play around with that a little bit, but the majority of that budget is already going to public safety. Now, that always annoys big government people in those positions because they want to extract that money and spend it on more interesting things like grant grifting operations to your homeless industrial complex friends. So that's usually where they want the money to go. And so it annoys people who have that idea. But the truth is, it's kind of mundane, practical. That's where most of the money goes. In a big city, generally it's the same way. If you're a big enough city, you have your own law enforcement and maybe a district court type system or your own jail even, then it's a higher proportion in the city. Or you're contracting out maybe with a county to do your law enforcement. But public safety tends to be the majority of funds at the county and city level in most cases. And so when you have budget problems at the city and county level, which a number of them do, I think, Michelle, you're contacting me from Franklin or Benton County area, and I know I've seen some of the budgets in those counties, and the problem was with a lot of cities and counties is that when COVID kicked in, it looked like a financial disaster for these places. And at the time, I did videos when COVID started just saying, listen, this is from a practical standpoint. We got to tighten our belt and look at real cuts. Well, I was wrong because the Fed stepped in with just this avalanche of money, which is why your dollar's worth a lot less today. But they avalanched so much money around that they dumped all this unaccountable. Now, there's a lot of fraud. A lot of it got wasted and lost and stolen. But it did artificially inflate the budgets of those counties. Now that COVID cash is kind of coming through, the last little gasp of COVID cash squandering is occurring right now. And of course, government, because they can't help themselves, and it's human nature, once they get the extra cash in hand, they don't use it for what it was intended to be used for, which was to deal with emergencies or short-term situations. They really hold on to it and bloat their operating budget, and sometimes even blow it and grow it up even bigger, and so they bloated it to this certain size that it can't be sustained. And now it's come crashing down. So there's going to be budget cuts. Well, what happens is if you're one of these politicians, especially if you're a big government politician, and you've implemented some kind of doggy walking park or habitat restoration project or some kind of other scheme with the extra bonus cash that you've had on hand for a while, you're not going to cut it because that's what you've staked your political future on and your little cadre of people who probably helped get you elected or keep you into office. And so that's your pet project. So you're not going to cut it. So what do you start doing? Well, you put the squeeze on law enforcement and maybe the court system in some way to suck cash out of that. And that is the biggest part of your budget. So without money coming from there, you have a hard time retaining the schemes and plans that you've already implemented and wasted with taxpayer dollars already. So I would anticipate that that's something that's going on. The 1/10 of 1% in the sales tax isn't going to go far in most jurisdictions. Some counties would go a little bit further, but that's I still like where you're coming from, Michelle. Keep it up. Those are good ideas. How is the AG race going? Well, we don't really know. I mean, it's still early on. Ferguson's the front runner, as usual. A Democrat would usually be considered the front runner. Obviously, the Seattle Times and others are afraid of Reichert winning this race. If we did have a Republican elected, that would be a radical shakeup to the establishment and kind of the blob of Olympia. So there's a lot of concerns that Reichert could win. Reichert could win despite his incompetence of his consultants. He could win because of the surge of people voting for the initiatives and the tendency for probably some of those people to vote differently as they look down ballot. They're less likely to vote for the big government. Ferguson is, they're less likely to vote for him probably. The other thing that I don't think can be underestimated is that Ferguson is a nasty guy with a lot of history of alienating people even on his own side. He's not a likable person. He's a weirdo and a strange guy. And so what happens is he doesn't have any kind of enthusiasm for his political campaign. That's a challenge if it's a close race. And it seems like it's closer than than the Democrats want to admit right now. I say that because their own polling indicates it's closer, but I don't know how close it is. And winning the governor's race would be a big deal for Washington State. I don't think people can understand the significance of losing, and Ferguson's a weak candidate, but a nasty guy as it is, so we'll see what happens. Let's see, Michelle, thinking that may have bipartisan appeal, especially with the amount of interest to scrape off the top and turn back into budget for reserves or other needs. And Michelle, this is referring to the previous question about 1/10 of 1% on public safety, shifting that into the police. And I think that's true, and I think there's some good ideas there. We will see. Let's see, Rossi was robbed. Yes, he was. That was a complete scam back in 2004. Technical difficulties. When the immigrants come over, they are asked to agree to pay taxes if they work. Being issued a social security number, wouldn't they be able to get a driver's license, then followed by a voting registration card? Yes, and here's how it works. Even if they don't get a real social security number, they get a driver's card. Everybody gets a driver's license when you walk in and ask for it. At least if you're not a U.S. citizen, you pretty much always get it. And automatically, whether you want to be or not, they'll register you to vote. They do it every time. So the question is, do they vote? I don't know, but I bet the people that are offered $30 a ballot who sell them that aren't U.S. citizens here and they know they can't vote and they sell it to somebody else for $30, my guess is those ballots probably end up somewhere. I don't think they're buying them just for the heck of it. So those are the kind of problems that I'd be more concerned about. We have a lot of cleanup to do in the state, and that's actually one of the easiest areas we could clean up. And obviously Democrats have no interest in ever cleaning it up, but if there is a Republican administration that gets in at the federal level, this is something that they should be involved in helping us clean up. They don't even have to do it for us. Just let us see the list, even of just of non-citizens, and it's not hard to figure that out. At the federal level, they can do it. They already have E-Verify. There's all these ways of doing it, and we can start to figure out how to clean up some of the system. Missy, is it possible that even though we vote yes to pay less, it could be overturned like the $30 car tabs? You always have that possibility, but remember, there is a little difference with the program that we're looking at now, and it's not just a bunch of people that fell off the banana boat yesterday, and it's not a one-hit wonder kind of initiative. It's a suite of initiatives being run by people that actually pay for attorneys, that have spent a lot of money, that have had a lot of attorneys review it, that are prepared to litigate for real, and that are really willing to go back and push back on any attempt to legally undermine this. It doesn't mean there isn't a plan that the left has already, and I'm sure they do, and Ferguson will be part of it, to try to undermine cutting the tax grifting operations that they've set up through these various taxes. But voting yes is going to be a heck of a lot easier. And it's a microscopic amount of work that most of you have to do to get there. So just vote and get it in. The hard work of getting the signatures has already been done. So this is the easy part. Ballot comes out, fill it out, make sure that everybody else knows to vote yes, pay less, get that in, and that's your process of getting it approved. Let's see. Can you explain what's looked in? Great questions, by the way. Luke, you are asking a lot of good questions here. Can you explain what's going on with the ferry system? Is there not enough workers, or is a degrading quality of boats? It's mostly that there's not enough workers. Now, keep in mind, part of this was the COVID insanity of the Inslee administration, where a bunch of ferry workers, especially the people that had no contact with the public, people running the boats, people running the engines down below, a lot of these people that are involved in this with decades of experience specifically on those boats, were all told that if they didn't take the jab, they were going to get fired, and they ended up firing about 150 of them, I think, roughly in that number, but a huge portion of it. And ever since then, the ferry system has essentially become a third world ferry system. Unpredictable, nobody knows for sure what's going on. They definitely don't have the maintenance they used to. They definitely aren't being run as safely as they used to. And a huge portion of it, I should say, of the knowledge base got pushed out. And then you had this weird idea that Inslee had, that they had to turn the climate change grifting operations had to be applied to the ferry system. And so what they want to do is get all electric boats in, even though they don't have any kind of even though they don't exist, even though they don't have a way to support it on shore, even though there's really no good plan for that. And it's probably one of the, well, there's so many bad ideas. I won't say it's the stupidest idea that they've ever had, but it's one of the dumbest ideas that they put together. Mainly because you can't jumpstart a ferry, an electric ferry boat out there on the water very easily. It's not like just bringing fuel out to get an engine going or something like that. It's just silly. But you do have degrading quality of boats over time. They do have a predictable lifespan that they do cycle them out over time. But there's nothing more incompetent than government when you put government in charge of anything. It doesn't really matter. Government, bureaucracy, the nature of man, the incompetence, the corruption, the lobbyists, whatever it takes. Anything you want done worse, if you put government in charge, they'll find a way to get there. And that's what our system in the ferry is. Although I have to say a large part of it was getting rid of a lot of the quality workers who actually did work there. And especially being so nasty with how they got rid of them, it destroyed the idea that actually working for government for smart people or capable people was a good idea. And so it's really been a brain drain on the system, and a system that doesn't have very many brains in the first place. So when you do have the initiative, or when you have that going on right now, it's quite a problem. Being hunk of man, another ad I saw, an uber-rich guy put the initiatives on the state ballot. The ad totally disregards we the people put it on the ballot. Yeah, that's right. I mean, listen, they've been attacking, and this is funny. This is what's pretty weird about this whole attack from the billionaires. So you got a guy named Brian Haywood. I've interviewed him on my show before. You can see the interviews on the channel. Look up Brian Haywood in the search function on my video channel, and you can watch them for yourself. Listen to him in his own words. It's a long-form format video interview that I did at the time, because I think he's probably one of the most consequential people in Washington State history in recent times. And here's a guy who has money, so he's a wealthy guy, but he's not a billionaire. But he decided that this was a big deal, and he got these through, and he made it work, and it's a fairly significant deal. So let's just say what they're doing is the billionaires now are mad that their grifting operations could be defunded, and they may have to put more money into these operations if they want them to continue, and it's always easier to make you and I pay for their dreams and schemes. So they decided that what they want to do is they did this polling, and they realized the ideas were very popular. Most people want to cut these stupid taxes. So they decided to attack the sponsor of the initiative, which is Brian Haywood, and some other guys too, but really Brian is the main attack. And so they've decided to attack him as some rich guy. Billionaires who are worth way more than Brian Haywood is are the ones funding the attack ads, and that's what's so hypocritical about the whole thing. Anyway, it's just one of those things. It's just ridiculous. So I think it's worth just being aware of that. Let's see. Odd? No, it's not odd. That's exactly how they roll. They run a bunch of civic ventures, as much as the other guys did all their surveys, and then they decided that's how they're going to run it. Jack Podler, Glenn in the Trump cabinet is head of the Department of Government Elimination. Yeah, actually, that only way you could ever get me to work for government, I think, and it's about the only job I'd ever want, is if government, federal or state. Although I have zero interest in ever going back to D.C., but I would love to do this at the state level. It's just let me come in and downsize government. There's an effective and efficient way to do that, and there's a way that should be done, and it's just going to be. That's about the only thing I'd really enjoy doing in government. Otherwise, I don't ever really want to work for government at all. Let's see. John Jacobson, they'll try to find flaws in initiatives, sink them legally. Yep, they will. That'll be probably part of what they try to do. Thunder Warrior, before I sign off, I want to say first, you're so funny. You're also so kind of me to ask so many questions last week. Yeah, no problem. Don't get offended by that. Listen, I know you did ask a lot of questions last week. That's totally fine. Let's see. If Democrats, here we go. Kevin Bryant, good question here. If Democrats cared about climate carbon, they would be planting trees. They would also take the thousands of tires they dumped in the Puget Sound, acting as artificial reefs that never worked. Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing. I live on a tree farm, small tree farm. I've planted thousands of trees myself. And I've had to manage it, right, which is, limbing and thinning and removing fire hazards or dangerous trees. We had an infestation, I think, that of a Chinese longhorn beetle that apparently killed a bunch of the big leaf maples on our property. Now, fortunately, that's not the majority of trees that we have, but we did have a bunch of big leaf maples that were all killed by that. Well, they become a fire hazard in the woods in awkward locations, and so you have to go in manually and take them out and get rid of the dead wood. And the weird, the decarbonizing approach in Washington State that the Democrats have had to this has just been absurd and ridiculous. And especially in our state, one of the things that if you want people to have a healthy future, you make power inexpensive and available, widely available. It leads to a happier, wealthier, more productive life for society. The Democrats, every policy that they've had that I've seen, has been mainly focused on destroying the potential ability of average people to have a quality and a productive life. They destroyed the education system with their weird ideas, DEI, ESG, whatever you want to call it, fuzzy math isn't real, or whatever their schemes are. And the last thing they want is literacy and people who are mathematically literate, especially. That's a super big danger. If you actually believe in the English language and you believe math is real, there's no way you can be a Democrat because you're a threat to their operations and their plans. And so, so everything they do just destroys the potential for a prosperous and healthy life. And the reason why is that they enjoy making it more miserable because then they can use the misery as an excuse for why you need them to come in and help bail you out. And that's how you get a lot of the corruption and all these other things. So anyway, you got a lot of stuff like this that unfortunately seems to drive the political process. It doesn't mean the Republicans are your salvation, but the Democrats in Washington State are definitely the sum of all fears in the group that wants to go and hurt you as much as they possibly can, provided they can get the power. Here's Luke Thin here. Snohomish County is proposing a 0.2% sales tax in November, hiring new cops to build a facility and support program to reduce drug issue. And I don't know how I should vote for this. That's a good question. I would definitely look into it. Snohomish County is a wealthy county with a lot of resources and money. Where's the money going right now? Why isn't it already going into some of these programs? I would be digging and looking closer. Most likely, your county has already diverted or supplanted the existing budget that would have normally been there for law enforcement, and it's sending it into other departments. Also, look at your roads budget and the supplanting that tends to go there, where they transfer funds from there over to law enforcement in your general budget. And they do it as like a shell game where they'll transfer those funds over there. And theoretically, it's for, road accidents or for being able to respond to accidents and traffic infractions and things like that, as opposed to pay for law enforcement's ability to do that. But what they really do is they take that same money out of the budget in law enforcement and they use it as a slush fund in the county government. And I've seen them do that in more than one county. They definitely do it in Thurston County, and I've seen them do it in other counties as well. So watching how these interfund transfers go on in local government, you can actually learn quite a bit on who's paying off who and where the grifting operations are going and where money's getting stolen or wasted. It's a good way to start digging into it right now. Let's see. And this is your answer from somebody else here saying that they'll vote no. The taxes are pretty high there. I mean, I would really be digging into their budget and find out what's wrong with them. Let's see, Kevin Bryan, if you look at the breakdown of car tabs, there is a slot where it's $30. Just the added BS line items are on top. Yeah, and that's true. Look at your car tabs. Local government's gotten in on the action. It was a way for them to have kickback schemes to cover whatever disastrous ideas that they have locally. Most of the money's wasted, but that's how they do it. Nathan Danner, I thought the ferries were already electric. No, they are not. They are actually diesel, mostly. So, and imagine, and it just takes a certain level of engineers to be more familiar with being able to understand this intuitively, but imagine what it takes to run a ferry all day long with a lot of weight through Puget Sound, especially like the Anacortes run that leaves from Anacortes and goes up to Friday Harbor, or even the ferry that runs all the way up into Canada, up to Sydney, British Columbia. I mean, these are significant ferry runs. I mean, the Bremerton-Seattle run is relatively small. The walk-on ferry in Kitsap County, that goes from Fauntleroy, and there's a number of these little ferries that we have in the state. You could run maybe a small ferry under some exotic system, but it's a heck of a lot easier to maintain and keep the facilities up on shore if you have a ferry system that runs off of diesel. It's just easier. So anyway. Does downsizing government involve operating a steamroller? No, but it's just funny, right? And people say that they want to downsize government, and most of the time they don't. What they really want to do is run it maybe a little bit more efficiently, and that's a good aspiration too. But we really legitimately have to take big sections of government and just get rid of them. Or at least maybe sometimes you combine agencies. Sometimes that's a little better approach. Sometimes you restructure the rules so that the agency doesn't have so many of them, so you don't need as many people to justify their existence in a bloated bureaucracy. There's a lot of different things that you can do to downsize government that would be more efficient and effective. And really what you want to do is downsize it enough that you can cut taxes even more, and then that it serves as kind of a resistance point to keep government from bloating larger. Now what happens is if you go to downsize government today and the people that are in charge are still in charge then, what they want to do is they want to say, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut all the things that people actually want government to do, which is public safety, which is keeping criminals in jail, which is keeping mentally ill off the street, and keeping our bridges from falling down. And so those are the first things they defund, because they figure if they can get the bridges to collapse and crime to go crazy, then you'll get desperate and you'll give them more money. The last thing they want to cut is the wasteful and useless multi-million-dollar fiascos that they're squandering money on, because it's usually their donors or their supporters or future job prospects that are extracting that cash through whatever scheme or excuse they get. And they don't want to cut that because that's their gravy train that they're building up for their donors, their supporters, or their, like I said, their future employment opportunities. They don't want to cut that. So they cut the things you actually care about and destroy that as fast as they can. And it's just become a classic scenario where that's how they cut, or they want to cut the transparency, because God help us if you actually know what they're doing. They won't lay off the 110 employees that are public information officers and exist mostly to push propaganda from the state. They don't want to lay them off because keeping the narrative going is pretty important. But they'll lay off the public information officer so that you can't get public records to find out exactly how corrupt and dishonest local government really is. This is just how they operate. It's kind of a classic scenario. Let's see, to the governor's race at least. Not sure where that was referencing, sorry. Jack Palder, if we make CO2 any lower, most plant life will start dying off, followed by animal life, which we're a part of. Yeah, I know. I mean, people, if you don't grow plants, you don't even understand this at all. And since the vast majority, only about 2% of the population in America is left with any kind of close association with agriculture or farming. I've been on the board of Thurston County Farm Bureau for a while. I was on the state board as well. I've resigned recently just for time management purposes. But, if you've ever had to raise animals or grow crops or been involved in any of that process at all, you have a much better understanding of how the real world works, at least on that side of it. And CO2 is plant food. And, many, many times in geologic history in particular, the world's had a much higher level of CO2 than they do now. Is oftentimes it's a much healthier environment, actually. But by fixing attaching their religion to this as the orthodoxy of the day, it allows them to grift a lot of cash. And so there's nothing you're going to tell them about the truth that's going to change the mind for the programs that they're trying to push. So they don't really care about CO2 or anything else. They just care about the money that they get from it. Because everything has the solution, the objective is to get more money and more power and control. And so the policy must achieve that. They don't care if it cuts CO2. They don't even care if it gives it lip service to get there. That's fine. But it's just like I-2117. The programs that they cut there make no difference to the climate conditions of Washington State. Whether it exists or whether it doesn't exist, it's not going to change anything. But it is going to change how much money gets grifted and stuck in people's back pockets, and that's the way the program works. T.T. Burton, okay, wait a second. Sorry about this. Golden Chris, what do you think about the federal small business? Well, I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm assuming you mean the SBA or Small Business Association or some government programs. Listen, almost all these programs are incompetent and disastrous from the beginning. Department of Commerce. Does anybody think if the Department of Commerce was eliminated tomorrow that nobody would conduct commerce in America? And the answer to that is no. At the federal level, if the Department of Education went away tomorrow, are they just going to stop educating kids? No, they won't. The Department of Education educates nobody, but it does help fund a big bureaucracy that has nothing better to do than trash whatever education system we happen to have in the country. And so this is how government is set up to operate. And incompetency, all these things aren't really part of the equation. there are things that people generally, surveys will show, interaction with people will show. It would be nice to have a government that had the ability to respond to emergencies like FEMA. But as we're seeing in North Carolina, they're incompetent clowns. Sure, possibly willfully incompetent in this case for political reasons, but they're terrible. They weren't good in Katrina. They weren't good now. They aren't good anywhere. So even when it's something that generally people will say, yeah, it's good to have some kind of a plan or an operation there, is that the program that's actually going to help? And the money you put into these programs is wasted in the majority of cases. Let's see, there's a question here. British Columbia operates one electric ferry. I think I heard that. I don't know a lot about it, and I don't think their experience on it's been that impressive. It could be that the Bainbridge ferry is the only run that makes money, and it would make sense a little bit just because of where it goes. Let's see, when was the last time the state was audited legitimately, all departments? Never. It's never been done. No one's ever really audited the state of Washington. Audit in the truest sense of the term. There's a rolling audit system the state auditor does, and it's patty cake auditing, kindergarten style. What they do is they contact the state agency ahead of time and say, hey, state agency, we're just letting you know that we're going to look at this program, that program, and this program, but don't worry, we won't look at any of these others. Is that okay with you? And they'll say, maybe, and then they'll make it, drag it out, and then they'll find problems, and then they negotiate behind the scenes, and they don't publish their initial finding results because they let the politics negotiate what their final finding report is that they actually get out in the state audit report. So the state doesn't audit anything. It's just a fake program. If they accidentally discover fraud, it's truly an accident. But most of the time, they'll discover fraud and theft that, by the way, usually passed many audits before they got there. But they'll discover the fraud and theft usually from whistleblowers, and that they can do. There's actually a sub-department inside the state auditor's office that's more focused on clear fraud and theft operations, and they're pretty good. The employees they use there generally know what they're doing. The other employees are just political creatures for the most part. I mean, some of them want to do a good job. I hear from them all the time, but they're not really allowed to do serious audits. It's actually probably even worse at the local government level, but that's a longer conversation, and we're running out of time on that one. I don't know if you answered this already. How are the main races looking in the state? I would say the governor's race looks close to me, all things considered. The sleeper races at the state level, I think, that have the potential to make an impact that people may not notice or pay attention to really is the insurance commissioner is one of them, because Phil Fortunato's clearly trying to make people's insurance costs go down. Patty Cooter, the Democrat who's running for that position, is a loon. And you would have to be crazy to think that she's not going to jack your insurance rates up with whatever goofball plan she does when she gets in there. So that's an interesting race, because some people may recognize there's just enough craziness there that maybe they can take a chance. It's not a high-profile type position, and Senator Fortunato's been around a long time, and maybe that could change. The other race I think that's a little quiet is the OSPI, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. You have Chris Reichdahl, who really deserves thanks from all the homeschool programs and private schools in Washington State, because nobody's destroyed public education more effectively and more efficiently than Chris Reichdahl has as head of OSPI, Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, the guy who's in charge of public schools. He's been so incompetent, so disastrous, and such a clown that even the Seattle Times came out and said he was high-fiving kids in the slow lane and celebrating mediocrity. Of course, that's the exact person the Seattle Times has decided to endorse. But Reichdahl got such a low percentage in the general election, similar to Reichert on this case, where you had the top two primaries, so there were more than two people in the race, but they both got very low percentages, which indicates a low level of enthusiasm and support from average normal people in the state. And so Dave Olson, who's running for OSPI director as a experienced school board member who actually cares about math and believes it's real and believes in actually educating kids and not in trashing kids' future the way Reichdahl does, there's a potential for a kind of a shaky surprise. That's also not a partisan race, so there's no partisan affiliation indicated on the ballot between them. Reichdahl's obviously a raving leftist, but there's no clear party affiliation there in that race, and so I could see people making a difference in a couple of those races. Those are sleeper races I think people don't pay as much attention to. Sort of like the treasurer's office, sort of like the auditor's office sometimes. Just races that could surprise you, and Republicans have won these races not that long ago. Not the auditor's office. They haven't won that one in a long, long time. Let's see. Here we go. What is one factor that is contributing to the annual wildfire season in the West? Can you explain forest management practices they did in the past but not doing now? Yeah, absolutely. One of the practices they used to have in forest management was a more aggressive thinning policy and also burning, off-season burning, right? Where you're basically, you've thinned out forests or you've harvested an area and you have a lot of woody debris left over, and they would burn that woody debris in very controlled burns. You don't do it in the middle of August when there's a heavy wind so you can spread a forest fire. You do it if you time it right, you can actually safely burn big areas and clean them up quite a bit. It mimics the natural habitat that would occur normally where you would have forest fires, relatively simple forest fires that would come through and introduce just a lot of nutrients back into the soil, make it easier to grow. What you're doing there is you're reducing the fire load for a new crop of trees that would be growing up, and you're more likely to have a healthy crop of trees grow up in that scenario. Department of Natural Resources no longer does that type of forest management practice at all. They don't allow it. They have like this paid thing where you have to pay for the size of the fires and the carbon content and stuff, and they make it more expensive than the timber that you would take on the property, and it's just another grifting operation that the DNR uses to extract cash and make it less likely to, and make your wood a lot more expensive when you decide that you want to build something out of firewood or out of wood, 2x4s or something out of the mill. Something else that they don't do is they tend not to do thinning or cleanup in the woods at all anymore, and that's part of what, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of energy. If you don't understand it, you just haven't been through this. It's a lot of work. Some stuff can be mechanized, but there's still a lot of labor and time and energy that needs to be put into paying attention to this stuff. And they don't do that anymore. They also will have odd rules and restrictions about how they do logging now. Everything just simply adds up to the cost. They make it harder, they make it stranger, they make it not scientific based at all, they use excuses to get cash, they do all kinds of stuff, destroying roads so that it's a lot more expensive for you to go back and log in the future because you haven't maintained the roads, which also means that you're not maintaining fire access points if you want to go in and control those roads. And by the way, it also makes it harder for you and I to go out and enjoy the wilderness because the roads are closed down and you have less access. So there's a lot of that stuff that's actually all tied in and related to how forest management practices are done today and different than they were in the past. They haven't always been perfect in the past at all. There were a lot of problems with how logging used to be conducted and operated. They didn't used to do reforestation, for example, for many years, and I don't believe they started to do that until the 30s. I think I'm right on that. 1930s, I think, is when they started actively going back in and doing more active management. But active management tends to be a little bit better approach to forest management, and you're going to get better basically you're going to get better outcomes in your forest management practices over time, but you measure that time in decades and half centuries. And so we're going to be dealing with probably a half century of egregious incompetence and stupidity. So it'll take a long time to get the forests back to any kind of health that they might have had. Yep, and Nathan Dahmer, this is just a comment, not a question, but yeah, it was something that they used to do. Let's see, I will, basically I think I'm gonna call it a day because I've been on this a little bit longer. I usually try to do this for about an hour, and I've been going for about an hour, a bit longer than that, hour and 20 minutes or so. But thank you guys so much for watching my live stream today on a Monday. I know the volume of traffic is not going to be as much as it usually is on my Tuesdays. And I'm sorry I'm going to have to do it again on a Monday next week. That's going to be what happens. If I see you in Benton County tomorrow, I'm looking forward to seeing you. If I see you out in Spokane on Saturday and the 12th, please make sure that you come up and say hi. And if I'm going to see you in Ellensburg on the 19th, please do the same. And if I'm going to see you at Sharon Hannick's fundraiser on the 15th up in Redmond, I look forward to seeing you there as well. A lot of stuff's going on, guys, a lot of busyness. Hopefully you enjoyed the videos I put out this week. Let me know what you think, and we will see you next week.